So we heard some really good discussion this morning and hopefully a lot of food for thought. I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes about Section 9. It's incident investigation, evaluation, and lessons learned. By the way, I realize I failed to introduce myself. I'm Linda Daugherty. I am one of two deputies that work in the Office of Pipeline Safety. I work for Jeff Weiss, who was to be our Master of Ceremonies today. And my focus is field operations. So with the 5 regions that do inspection but also accident investigations, I have a lot of interest in this particular topic. You know, when we look at what the standard requires, it provides a lot of guidance about management commitment, leadership, process, operational controls, and it also touches on what do you do when things go wrong, or what are some things you should think about. When you look at an investigation, many of these items you'll say, well, we do a lot of these, or we do all of these. But when you really look at what the standard proposes, you need to think about how well you do them and see if you could perhaps add to or go a little farther. Most everyone that has an incident, or in this case, a near miss, the standard actually includes specifically near miss incidents that could have resulted in a significant accident. That's new. The federal requirements are a little bit shy on that issue, but it's something that we need to look at because very often a near-miss accident could have been a bad accident, but for the grace of God, right? So it's something we need to take into consideration. So we pretty much all know that when something goes wrong, you have to look at why did this happen? What's the contributing failure factors? You want to have findings and lessons learned. And oftentimes we go through that, we have process and procedures, and we stop there. But one of the things that I think it was Chris Hart mentioned, the NTSB board member, is he said, when we do accident investigations, we need to stop looking at how individuals failed, but how the process failed. In other words, unless someone deliberately does something wrong, should you not be focused on how an incident or a near miss occurred, how our process and procedures allowed something bad to happen, and then put some type of mitigation in so it can't reoccur, instead of focusing on, oh, John didn't do this again right. Maybe it's our process and our procedures we need to evaluate and improve. The other thing is the standard says that we need to look at recommendations for improvement. And then here's the other thing that some of us do better than others, is this whole idea of when we do have lessons learned, do we keep them in our accident team? Or do we specifically share them with the people that are responsible for risk assessment and control processes? There's that link, that integration of outside the stovepipe that we need to think about. And then also, and by the way, I should mention, in front of my PowerPoint slides, I have the shalls highlighted. These are things that the standard said every operator shall do. I stepped right there in it, didn't I? And then there's a couple here that say may. Okay, so when we talk about follow-up and communication of lessons learned, the standard says you need to have a procedure to track the lessons learned and communicate them to appropriate personnel. Track them. You heard that in several other people's talks. Tracking items, making sure there's follow-through, making sure they're actually implemented. We also talk here about sharing lessons learned externally through peer-to-peer interactions. And I know some industries, aspects of the industry are doing a good job on this. We can always improve. And I will also mention this, there's a little bit of humble pie in this for me, because when I look at the standard, I realize, and Jeff and I have talked about this quite a bit, we have to apply this internally to the regulatory agency as well. My agency needs to do a better job of sharing lessons learned throughout our organization. We need to do a better job of sharing the lessons that we learn with you. And so there are different aspects. This doesn't, 1173 applies to the pipeline industry, but the concepts apply to any organization that wants to improve their performance record. And so I think it applies to the regulatory agency as well. The other item is that you should keep records for use in later risk assessments. Okay, well that makes sense. You give it to people, the risk assessment people, so they can evaluate how to improve the processes. But what's this thing about later? So this brings us to section 9.3, and this is a new one. It says you need to look at previous investigations. You know the investigation you did a while back? Go back and look at it again. See if you can harvest something new from it. I'm not talking about an endless recycle of incident investigations. What I'm talking about is think it through. Is there something you know now, with the information you have today, that you can gather more from a past incident or a near miss? And I'm going to give you a very simple example. Many of you know that, just a decade or two ago, that we were convinced, we meaning the collective, were convinced that SCC stopped at the Canadian border. Right? There was just some barrier. SCC just could not happen in the U.S., and we were wrong. Going back and looking at those incidents, we could probably harvest a lot of information about SCC from incidents that were categorized in different categories. Think about what you can learn from past events and move it forward. The other thing that I think is very effective is you don't just apply lessons learned, track the completion and move on. You try to figure out how effective did our organization learn from an event. When you look at something that happened 3 years ago, okay, so you had so many lessons learned and you applied it. What are the results? Did you organizationally actually learn, or did you put a check mark and say, yep, we implemented it and we're done? There's a difference between performing a task and actually benefiting from the task. And the last item that I have here to talk about is learning from external events. We're usually pretty good about sharing information internally. Something bad happens within our organization, and we're going to share with our organization. There are partners. There are people. There are employees. There are supervisors. That entity will share information. But you know what? There's a lot you can learn from other agencies. The best training is, the cheapest training is learning from events that others have gone through. And there's a lot of information out there. Whether it be NTSB incident reports, PHMSA incident reports, there's all sorts of information you can look at and say, well, gee, are we doing that here? Have we got that item covered? And there's an increasing effort amongst the industries to share with their peers, which is a fantastic thing. And I see liquid agencies sharing with liquid and gas sharing with gas, and I think sometime in the future, we're going to see all the pipeline industry sharing, because a gas pipeline has the same kind of issues that a liquid pipeline does, and vice versa. Distribution's a little bit different, but anyway, that's all I had to talk about. I'm going to bring up, or ask Mark to come up, Mark Wiesner. He is the operations advisor for ExxonMobil. Here's the clicker.
Okay.
And
It's the one right in the middle. One more.
there we go.
There we go. Okay, great, thanks. Good morning. That's pretty good. We're getting better. You guys will note that I am coatless today. In my rush to leave the house this morning, I actually live here. I didn't come in from out of town. I'm trying to go on vacation later this week. There's a lot going on, trying to get ready for this, and I left my coat at my home this morning, so I hope you'll forgive me. I'm a little more casual than the rest of these fine-looking people that are up here with me. As Linda said, my name is Mark Wiesner. I'm an operations advisor for ExxonMobil Pipeline Company. It's a pleasure to be here today with everybody. I'll also tell you, it's been a real privilege to work with some really good people on this committee. And I know Ron said it when he made his opening comments. And I've not met a group of people that had more passion about what we were working on. And Ron tells those early meetings were tough because everybody had passion about what we were doing, right? And so, but we are really pleased with what this RP has turned out to be. And I'm going to talk about emergency preparation and response. And we talked about this being a framework, a philosophical document. The emergency preparation and response portion really is a framework. It's only half a page, but it's got a lot of conceptual ideas. It's not meant to there is another RP that's underway that gives more detail about emergency preparation and response, but it gives some framework around things that you should consider. Now, I've been with ExxonMobil almost 35 years, and Ron talked about learning from hard knocks. You know, we've had a safety management system in place for about 25 years. We call it our OIMS, or Operations Integrity Management System, and that came out as a school of hard knocks. It came out of a series of events that happened in the 80s, and you may have heard of an event called the Exxon Valdez. And that really is what started us down the journey to our safety management system. And everybody, you've heard it several times up here. It is a journey. It is not something that, there's no finish line here. At least I hope no one ever believes they've crossed the finish line, okay? And the challenge for us, for ExxonMobil as an established large operator with an existing safety management system, to take the requirements that are written into this document and challenge ourselves. Can we learn from this? We don't know everything there is to know about safety management systems. We know a lot. We've learned a lot of hard knocks. And so the challenge for us will be to take it and try to improve on what we have. And that's what continuous improvement is all about. The goal of the safety management system is obviously to prevent pipeline incidents, right? Now, when we went to the voting process, we got lots of comments. So why are we putting emergency preparation and response in this document, right? This is about preventing incidents. Well, I would submit to you that having a strong safety culture that prevents incidents starts with a healthy dose of understanding what could happen, right? And so you've heard other folks talk about risk management. You've heard other folks up here talk about learning. Linda talked about learning from both internal and external events. And so you have to think about what can occur before it occurs, and that's why this is a very critical component of a strong safety culture. Now, as we say, sometimes events do occur, and if you think about it, a prompt and effective response minimizes the adverse effect to people, to the environment, to assets, and to reputation. We call that internally the PAIR process, right? Because you're trying to protect a bunch of things. It's not just one thing. It's a number of activities. Now, what does that mean? Well, I within ExxonMobil, I've done a number of things, and I actually have been incident commander on a number of incidents that we've had to deal with, things we've learned from. Back in 2007, we had a spill south of College Station on our fuels pipeline in Navasota, Texas. I was the incident commander for that. And then a couple years ago in Central Arkansas, I was the incident commander an event we had in Mayflower, Arkansas. And I am, frankly, within the company, I'm the owner of our emergency response and preparation system. So I have a real passion for this, right? And so if I look back at those events and I think, well, gee, I consider those to be successful responses. Now, I will frankly tell you, I wish neither one of them ever occurred, right? But when something does happen, you want to be able to respond effectively, and you want to be able to learn from it, okay? And so if I think about that before I get to the actual framework elements, if I think about what makes a successful response, one is people, right? Do you have knowledgeable, trained people who are empowered to act, right? So we've talked about the ability to stop work, right? A lot of us have processes within our company for somebody in the middle of a job to say, whoop, something's not right here, right? So if I think about empowered to act, so if I got a controller in a control room in Houston looking at a pipeline operation, I want that person, if they sense something is wrong, to shut that pipeline down, and let's deal with it later in terms of did he make the right decision? Did he not make always the right decision to exercise caution, okay? The second thing is, have you identified the resources that you need? And this framework takes you through that. So I'm privileged for a large company. We have a lot of internal resources. We have what we call our strike teams that operate out of the refineries. We have what we call our regional response teams. I'm a member of the North American Regional Response Team. This is a team that comes in and basically runs the ICS for us while we're doing a response, right? But if you're a small company, it doesn't mean you don't have resources. There are OSRO, there are oil spill response contractors. You have local emergency responders you can partner with. There's a lot of things you can do to get resources on the ground where you need them. And a lot of that starts with what I consider to be the third thing, which is the battle's won before it actually occurs, right? Think about what could happen before it does happen. And that's what this framework is all about. Thinking about tying in the elements of risk management with lessons learned to prepare yourself to respond and hope you never have to, right? So if I just take us through the system requirements, it says operators shall maintain procedures for effectively responding to a pipeline incident. You need to have plans that are in place. They need to be ready for deployment. Trying to figure out what you're going to do when you're in the middle of the response from scratch is not where you want to be, right? You want to think about these things. You want to identify your resources. You want to have your people trained. You want to have things mapped out before you have to do it. You always have to change on the fly, right? No two incidents are the same. You always want to be able to adjust. But you need to have plans in place and have those ready to go. Are they accessible? Where are they posted within your company documentation? Have you communicated it to the people who need to know, both employees and contractors, right? And lastly, obviously, a lot of us we're under the framework of regulatory, and we have to meet all our regulatory requirements. And I tell you, you have to go beyond that. You have to really think about not only meeting the requirements of the regulation, but going beyond that, right? So if you think about, if we take us through the system elements that are in element 12, plans should include the following elements. One, a risk evaluation on the type of events that it can occur. Spill. Do I have a facility next to a river? Can it flood? If I'm in California, if I'm Nick, do I got to worry about earthquakes? You know, do I have a pipeline across a fault or something like that we need to deal with, right? Where's this station located? We've got a station out in the valley, one of the valleys. I think it's San Joaquin Valley. It's in the middle of orchards. How do I get response people there? What do I do? How do our people need to respond when something happens? Notification requirements. Who in your organization is responsible for notifying local emergency responders, agencies, the National Response Center, PHMSA? Okay, delineate that as part of your plan. Have that worked out so those things that have to occur will occur. Identification of your response resources and what your interfaces are, right? So for us, we've got a variety of both internal oil spill response or emergency response capability. We also have external contractors that we use that are positioned around the country. When we got up into Arkansas, we used an oil spill response contractor that was based in Arkansas. We'd worked this out. We drilled with them. We trained with them beforehand, right? When we conduct a drill at a site, we bring the local emergency responders in. Does their equipment fit to our equipment, right? Do they know how to get in? Who do they contact? Use of ICS, all right? ICS is very important to have a scalable structure to be able to put some response capability on the ground, in place, structured so you're following the process. Do you have processes for safety, health, and environmental? If I have a spill on the ground, where do I get my industrial hygiene? Who's doing air monitoring, right? Do I have a site safety and health plan? Do I have access to all the MSDSs that we need to have? All those kind of things you need to think about beforehand. Communication plans. You know, these days nothing happens that doesn't get into the media and so forth. How do you communicate what's going on? How do you keep the local public and people who are impacted informed about what's going on, right? People need to know, right? Do you have a plan? How do you do that? Training and drills, okay? Involve your external agencies, involve your internal resources. And again, this is not just liquid pipelines. This is gas. These are any type of event. Could be at a security event. Could be weather related. I live in the Houston area. We have facilities in the Houston area. Once a year, we have a hurricane practice. What do we do? How do we communicate with each other? What do we do at this facility? Do we button it up and walk off? And we're tied in with refineries. So who does what first and when? We have to have all those dialogues before those things happen. And then Linda talked about lessons learned, right? Anytime you have a response activity, whether it's a drill or an actual event, you need to hot wash it after the fact, right? You got to figure out what we do right, what we do wrong, what we could have done better. Those are all things that are important and part of that plan, do, check, and X cycle of learning, and applying and improving, right? And Ron talked about acting deliberately, right? This is not something you do by accident. You put this into your plan and your schedule, and you drill on it, you review it, you consider it, you improve it, and then you start the process all over again. So anyway, thank you for letting me talk about element 12. It's something I have a lot of passion for, and with that, I'll turn it back to Linda.
So do y'all feel like you're kind of drinking from a fire hose? We're hitting on a lot of very different topics, right? But there's a lot more meat in here conceptually. Our next speaker is going to be Kate Miller. Well, actually with two, Kate Miller and John Studi. Kate Miller is the Engineering Service Director for the American Gas Association, and following her will be John Studi, who is the Vice President of Government and Public Relations, with the Association of Oil Pipelines. Kate is going to be talking about competence, awareness, and training, right? And then John will be talking about documentation and record keeping. And just to be ornery, I want you all to notice the height difference.
John and Kate?
Of the pairing here. Oops, wait a minute.
And so that Mark doesn't feel bad, I wouldn't have my jacket on either, but I started getting chilly. Thanks, Linda. As Linda said, I'm Kate Miller from the American Gas Association. We represent the distribution companies across the country. And you've heard different folks talk about, where do I point this?
You can do right. That's a pointer. Right
There,
you
okay.
go.
You've heard different folks as they've stood up here talk about how the group came together and some of our discussions that we had, et cetera. As we went through this particular element, I remember one discussion when we were talking about training and personnel being qualified, and what did that mean, and what did it take, and how did we put this into the document. I think it was actually Ron who came right out and said what we were all kind of thinking, but we were still kind of struggling with how to put it into words. And he said, well, if a person isn't competent, I don't want them doing a job on a pipeline. And you could just see the light bulbs going off. Oh yeah, competence. That says it in one word. But what does that mean when you're talking about pipeline safety management systems? It means that this person has the knowledge, they have the training, they have the experience, they have the wherewithal, they understand what they're doing, how to do it, what it means, and those types of things. To help you understand, because this can be kind of an abstract concept. An example from a different industry, but I think we can all relate to, an airline pilot. He doesn't necessarily have to know, although some of them do, all of the various elements of what goes into maintaining that plane, but he has to know that it is being taken care of. And when he gets into that cockpit, when he gets ready to actually fly that plane, he or she has to know what each of those dials and gauges, they have to know what everything that's out there in front of them, what all that means. And they have to know that they have to read those instruments, and they have to know how to react to those various readings, whether it's good or bad. That's kind of a parallel with what we expect from our folks. They have to know what to do, they have to know that they have to do it, And they have to know how to react when something doesn't go the way that it should, or the way that they had planned. This is what it says in the draft document that I understand it's now final, on its way to ANSI. So what do you expect from someone performing the job? What do they have to be able to do, and what goes into it? What are they expected to know? What kind of experience should they have? What kind of training do they need? And I'll come back to training in a second here. What kind of education, what kind of background do they need? And again, I like to give examples because I think that's a better way to explain all this and help you understand it. In a control room, remember I just talked about the pilot. I chose that example deliberately. Anybody with either 20/20 vision or corrected lenses can look at a panel in a control room and see the various elements of that and understand it or see it. But do they understand it? Do they know what it's telling them? Do they know what each of those little symbols mean? Do they know if this valve is open or closed? If you have the remote operated valves, if you push a button, what happens? Do they understand what happens if they shut that line down? Whether it's a gas line and they're putting folks out of service, or whether it's a liquid line and they're stopping the flow of that product. Do they understand the implications of that? Do they know what that means? Do they know when to do that? Do they know how to do that? Do they know that they also have to call certain personnel and who those personnel are? All of this goes into what does it mean to be competent? How does this person do their job, and how do they do it well? And you can take that similar example and ask that for different positions within your organization at different levels. And I also want to talk about awareness, because that's another very important aspect. Just last week, I had the wonderful opportunity of visiting an AGA member company. And when we first got there, they gave us a safety video. And they mentioned this concept, awareness. I was really proud of them because as we went through the whole tour and did other things, there were several other things that they kept mentioning, and I'm like, this is another element of the pipeline safety management system recommended practice. This is great. But they talked about awareness, and they talked in particular about situational awareness. We went out to one of their training locations, and the gentleman who was leading the tour at that point gave us a demonstration, and he talked about their vehicles. Remember the old circle of safety? What's around your vehicle? Be aware of that. Know what's going on before you move that vehicle. As we went through the tour and we progressed further, at one point he even gave us an example about an employee who came back into the building. There were some things going on, and they had a fall and broke their foot in several places and had a tragic incident. But again, if they had been aware, if they had realized what all was going on, the weather was bad, they came back inside and slipped on the wet floor. Awareness. That means more than you think it does when you first hear that word. As everybody else has stood up here and talked to you, and you just heard Linda comment and Mark go down through all of the things about emergency response and all of the things that are in this document, don't just take it at face value. What does competence mean? What does awareness mean? What do the folks who are doing the different jobs within your organization have to be aware of? What does it take for them to be competent? Think about that as you start setting up your plans, or as you're going through the improvement of your plans, as you go through the plan, do, check, act cycles. And I said I wanted to talk a little bit about training. And I don't want you to just think, obviously, what kind of training do they need in the first place? What kind of knowledge do you need to impart to that person to make sure that they are competent and they can do their job? But let's go beyond that a little bit. Let's start thinking about refresher qualification and training and operator qualification. Think about that as you go forward. What else has to be involved? And what information do you need to include in those? Consider what's necessary for that competence and put that into your training. And of course, don't forget your training awareness. Whoops, I'm gonna slide ahead. No wonder you guys are looking like, what's she talking about? Don't forget, yeah, I have been. Don't forget about your records. John's gonna talk about records extensively here in a couple seconds. That's also very important. Now we're up to this slide. What do you provide in the training? And again, the applicable elements of the pipeline safety management system that affect their job requirements. You don't need to train everybody on everything, but you do have to make sure they understand what they're doing and of the things that that interrelates to and with. And you also need to train them on how to report issues, problems, and the needs for improvement. So I have one more thing, one more thought that this is not directly in the document itself, but I want to leave you with this before John comes up to talk about records. You've also heard several people talk about the plan, do, check, act cycle, or the continuous improvement, how you are all constantly monitoring yourself, and are you improving, and how do you measure that? Please don't forget to include elements of competence, awareness, and training as you go through those continuous improvement cycles. Okay, so with that, I'll move the microphone up, and we'll let John take over.
Thank you, Kate. I don't know, John, you may have to hold the mic up. It's let's see.
Would you like to dance?
And there you go. You can use this one or this one.
Thank you. I'm John Studi from the Association of Oil Pipelines, and I lead government and public relations for the association and also the PHMSA programs, and I'm delighted to be with you here today. So document and record keeping conjures some of the basic questions. We know we have to do at least some of it. The deeper question is, why should we do more of it? And indeed, it's why we're here today. We've already asked why, and these can be some of the most important questions as a leader. Why are we here? And I don't mean in this room, I mean on the earth. Why is this happening to me? Those are questions maybe more for church or family. But then within the corporate setting, why should I do this? You can be made to do it. But then really the most important thing is, why is this good for me? That's where you get the incentive, the passion, the strive for excellence. And so there's this quote in the back of the document. It's actually not in the record keeping and documentation. It's in how this contributes to safety culture. And it says, if something is not written down, it doesn't exist. And of course, I don't know whether or not that's an ancient Chinese bureaucratic saying, but it certainly sounds like it, right? You know, it's one of those kind of things up there, and you could picture the Mandarin saying that kind of thing. But it is for sure in the back of the document. And it gets to this question. It reminds me of another one of my favorite sayings, and it goes more to the kind of the communication and public relations sayings. We all know it. A tree that falls in the forest makes no sound, right? Now, of course, as engineers, physicists, we know that it does make a sound. But we also know that it doesn't make a difference if it falls in the trees. No one knew that it fell. No one learned that it fell. There was no impression on the rest of the forest. And so it doesn't matter if it fell or not. And that really is our challenge here, because the SMS is like, or our companies are like the forest, and each of the activities are like our tree. And so the question is, if this SMS is operating in the forest of our companies, will it make a difference? Trees stretch for miles and miles. Our companies have activities. That's why we have an SMS, because we have so many activities. They are so complex. They're an industrial process, a refinery, that we need the SMS. It also means that we can prevent ourselves from knowing whether the tree fell or how we could prevent it from falling. If it's not written down, how do you know your pipeline? That's a question I know. That's one of Jeff's favorite sayings. Do you know your pipeline? We can We know that the incident where the person didn't know the pipeline was there, that was a stakeholder. How do you as leaders, how do you as employees know your pipelines? You may believe that you're good and that you're in a good place, but believing is not knowing. You don't have the information that tells you and reassures you. If it's not written down, how do you learn from experience? If an incident happened 5 years ago or 3 years ago, what was the intentional act that had you incorporate that into your operations? How do you make sure that you have all those learnings, not just because on an ad hoc basis, oh yeah, this incident happened, let's see if we can learn something, but because every year you documented that and you knew where in your processes that improvement needed to be made. If it's not written down, how do you know you're spending the right amount of money? Are we spending enough? Are we spending too much? That can be just as frustrating and just as damaging. If you're spending too much in an activity and it's not needed, that's inefficiency. That undercuts your credibility to need to spend and focus the money where it's needed, where the highest risks are. If it's not written down, how do you measure the progress you're making improvements? That's why we're all here. How do you show to yourself? How do you know that you made improvement? How can you document that? Whether it's for the regulator, the public stakeholder, or for your own performance metrics. So we get back to the actual document itself. Like the practice of other operational controls, documentation leads to greater certainty that the pipeline system will perform as expected. We all expect it to perform well. We all believe that it will perform well. This helps us know that it will perform well. 14.1, control of documents. Pipeline operators shall maintain a procedure for the identification, distribution. These are the technical things, but they're important. How do we get the word out to the forest, to the silos, to the different organizations that are operating the different facilities? They could be operating independently. They all have pieces of the puzzle that prevents the next accident. How do you get those together and add them up so that you are measuring risk appropriately? Pipeline operators shall maintain a procedure for roles and responsibilities, obviously always key for accountability, ensuring that things happen. What are the different types of documents? All the things that you can imagine: safety policies and objectives, procedures, work required by the SMS, regulatory and applicable requirements, other records needed to show the effective operations of the SMS. And really we can expand that to the effective operations of the organization. Obviously, this isn't a requirement to document everything, but again, you need to think for yourself, how do we know, do we have the information, do we have the pieces of paper that show us that we are where we want to be, and that those papers are in the hands of the people that are going to make a difference for your company, ensuring that your company is where it needs to be. All procedures referenced in this document shall be established, documented, implemented, and maintained for continued suitability. I think the last two words there are the most important. Continued into the future, so that it's intentional, it's regular, it's institutionalized. So a year from now, 5 years from now, you are doing what you needed to do. What you chose to do on this day is occurring 5 years from now. Thank you.
Very well said, John. I may steal your analogy. The forest, I don't know if I could, the tree in the forest. It's pretty eloquent. It took me a minute to get it, but once I got it, it was really nice. So our next speakers will be Paul Eberth and Peter Lidiak. Paul is I believe, you're still the project director for Sandpiper? Okay. I took these off emails, and so I'm always afraid it's outdated. The project director for Sandpiper Major Projects with Enbridge, and Peter Lidiak, the pipeline director at API. So they will be speaking about safety assurance and management review and continuous improvement. Is that yours? Yeah. You want to use the clicker? Or?
Well, good morning, and Since John started with reference to ancient Chinese, I thought I'll start with another quick reference myself. So I want to remind you of a Russian proverb that Reagan made famous for us. Well, I can't say it in Russian. I think it translates fairly clearly to trust but verify. And element 6 is our verification element, safety assurance in the standard. I'm going to take the next few minutes and cover off the highlights from safety assurance, which includes the requirements for auditing and evaluating your safety performance. Measuring performance is critical to executing any plan, especially your safety plan. In the presentation, I'll cover the 4 ways in which the recommended practice requires us to audit and evaluate our performance. So first, I'll cover off the requirement for auditing, then take you through the evaluation section, which is quite interesting. There are actually a few different ways we're asking operators to evaluate their performance. Talk quickly about the requirement on reporting and feedback, and then finally, performance measurement. So auditing is required by the recommended practice, and it's required to show conformance with the requirements in the standard. The requirement is that each of the 10 elements are audited once every 3 years, so it doesn't have to be a complete audit of the recommended practice all at once. You can actually break it up over the course of 3 years and do the audit element by element. The standard also provides some flexibility in how you or who does the auditing. It doesn't just have to be an external auditing group. It can be internal folks to the company that are not involved in the work that's being audited. As you've heard today, through the NTSB's investigation of past incidents, and by applying safety management systems in other industries, we know that these requirements will improve safety. And unless we audit, we won't know for sure whether or not we're doing them. The next section of requirements tells an operator to evaluate and assess the performance of the management system. Evaluation, like I said in the beginning, is broken into a few components. The first component of evaluation is to assess the performance of the management system elements. Well, why do we want to do that? Well, we need to make sure that those elements are actually being effectively applied in the organization. Take, for example, the element on incident investigation. At Enbridge, we not only track just incident types, but we also track the causal attributes of incidents. Whether or not those attributes are a lack of competence or defective tools or inadequate communication, it's important to know what actually caused the incident. In this way, we can detect trends in those factors and take steps to address them. We can deploy more resources to address specific root causes that are trending. And then if, over time, we see those systemic root causes are improving, then we have evidence that our incident investigation program is performing effectively. The second component of evaluations is to assess your safety culture. I won't spend a lot of time here because it's being covered by Masood and others. However, I want to share that safety culture can be measured. And this is the section in the recommended practice that makes measuring your safety culture a requirement. At Enbridge, we've deployed several different methods for evaluating our safety culture. We've used perception-based surveys across the entire company, and these surveys have provided key information on what employees value, their perceptions of the company's safety systems, and their perceptions of our leadership and our leadership's ability to lead in the area of safety. We've hired third parties to perform more fulsome safety culture assessments at specific parts of our organization, such as a large terminal facility and in our control center. And the National Energy Board recently commissioned a safety culture assessment of our business in our Canadian liquids pipelines operations. And I'm proud to say that Enbridge is formally using these assessments and making improvements to its operations based on the learnings from the various assessments. Sorry, I missed one more. We can't miss the maturity model. Finally, under evaluations, it's required that operators evaluate the growth and development of their safety management systems. For example, has that same incident investigation process developed from one that not only tracked types of incidents to one that now tracks causal attributes? If so, that would be an example of your incident investigation process maturing or growing and developing with your business. Or is line leadership now engaged in incident investigations? Or maybe in the past, it was just simply the safety or the integrity department involved in the incident investigations. To conclude with evaluations, unlike the 3-year audits, best-in-class organizations seek out more frequent opportunities, such as those through evaluations, to target both how the organization can improve areas of poor performance and then course correct before issues arise on a greater scale. It's also a great way to tackle challenges prior to the board asking why there could be a future audit deficiency. The third set of requirements that is in the safety assurance section is on reporting and feedback. And this requirement is to help ensure that performance feedback goes in the direction from the frontline worker to the head office. An operator shall establish and maintain a reporting and feedback process for employees and contractors. To be a high-performing operator, it's essential that performance feedback occurs. And it's further suggested in the recommended practice that the feedback process allow for anonymous submissions. It's important that the frontline workforce has a safe means of communicating their concerns with respect to risk and safety up through the chains in the organization. And then finally, on performance management, it's essential that operators establish key performance indicators of their operational and safety performance and use these KPIs to drive accountability and continual improvement. Another example at Enbridge, we have an executive safety team that's comprised of key executives. They meet monthly and monthly on safety only. This way, it allows other areas of the business to keep from creeping in and overpowering the area of safety when maybe there aren't incidents to talk about. This executive safety team takes a look at the KPIs and it drives accountability and it drives action from the top. Now, measuring performance is critical, again, to executing any plan, especially your safety plan. And as you work to comply with the requirements, I want you to stay on guard against box checkism. Sorry if I'm introducing a new term. But Linda warned us against it just a few minutes ago. It's not just a checking the box exercise. The benefits of this RP are only as good as the focus and the intent and the understanding that we bring to the work that we have to do. Study your results. There's a ton of information in the data that your company collects. And the data in these verification processes holds the key to understanding how we reduce risk and improve our operations.
Thank you, Paul. So Peter, would you like to come up and... You know, by the end of this workshop, I'll be pretty good at this.
That's right.
I'm learning as I go.
You'll have a new skill set to add to the resume. Good morning. I'm not going to make you say good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, geez. Why, thank you. I'm Peter Lidiak, and I'm the pipeline director at API for about another week or so. You know, we've talked about the fact that this SMS is a journey. Well, I'm taking a turn in my journey and heading on to something new next week. I'm not sure exactly what that will be, but I want to say that I've enjoyed working with this team, as others have said. It's been a real privilege doing that, but also working with this industry. And I include my colleagues in the gas industry as well, because I think we've worked on a lot of things in the last 10 years that I've worked pipelines that really show great commitment to this. As was referred to earlier, there are those out in the Fourth Estate who seem to feel that somehow the efforts of industry, without having a regulation or a law behind it, aren't worth anything. And I'm here to tell everybody who's listening that our industry is very dedicated to moving safety forward. And yes, we need some of those regulations and some of those laws, but we also need the things that are represented by efforts like this RP to move things forward. And if anyone wishes to debate that, I would be very happy to. Finally, I really do want to thank the team that helped to build this document. When we got the recommendation from NTSB to put this together, I had to think about who were the right people to pull together for this. And thankfully, Ron agreed to lead this team. And as we pulled the group together, as has been noted earlier by Ron, it was a very broad set of stakeholder groups we had to choose from. Some people we asked to do it said they didn't have the time or the inclination, so we had to go and find people that would fill the bill. But these people have been working since December of 2012, meeting virtually monthly for 2 days a month, and with meetings in between to produce this document. And it shows a great deal of commitment from the team to producing what we've put together. And I would ask the entire audience to thank the team, please. So onward and into the real program here. I will mention that my boss, Robin Rorick, is going to be opening up the afternoon session and talking a little bit about why this is an important document, both for pipelines and really for the whole oil and gas industry. I'm going to be talking about management review and continuous improvement, which is really the last thing in our cycle here. I say it's the last thing on the cycle, but of course, Masood is going to talk about a very important part of this document, and as has been mentioned. So why management review? Why are we going to do all this? It may be the hardest element to keep visible to your employees and really to your stakeholders as well, because management review doesn't always get back down to the troops. It doesn't always get back out to all your stakeholders, but it is an essential part of continuous improvement. If we don't have this management review, we're not going to have continuous improvement. It's not going to send the right message to everybody in the organization that we are doing what we need to do. It puts accountability and that same word again, intentionality, at the highest levels into the SMS that you'll be developing as operators. And there has to be regular and meaningful review by management, by top management, and it really does demonstrate the commitment and the accountability of the organization to everybody. Executive action is noticed by employees. I assure you of that, as is inaction. And you must keep this in mind as leaders in your companies. If you don't show that you're going to take action based on what you find in this, as you implement these safety management systems, you'll be letting yourself and your employees down. So, what is management review? It's the execution of the SMS to assure all elements are executed. You have to do that kind of review. You have to review your safety performance, not just that you did all the things, you didn't just turn the crank, but that you made the difference, that it actually had an impact. So you have to make sure your safety performance changed in the positive direction, we all hope, of course, to determine effectiveness of the SMS. And then finally, you have to make sure that you show that all of your goals and objectives that you set about when you did your planning have been met. Important stuff that you have to do as a leader in your organization. And you know, it struck me as we talked about this and learned a lot about Kinder Morgan's process that the operational managers at Kinder Morgan have regular meetings with their CEO to go over things just like this. And it's not on an annual basis, it's quite frequently. It's quite frequently. So here are some of the required inputs that the document talks about for the review process, and I'm not going to really just read down the list. I'm going to leave it up there for you. I really think that, you know, these are things that have been touched on by others that are built into the document. They're the inputs. These are the things you have to look at when you're going through the review. And then the outputs. And the outputs are probably more important even than the inputs, and because we need the summary of the assessment of the effectiveness of the SMS. Again, the effectiveness of the SMS has to be summarized. The improvements to risk management effectiveness and to safety performance. If you don't document them, John talked about if you didn't document them, they don't exist. That has to be an outcome from this review process. And they have to be embedded into your programs and into your system for the next iteration of the pipeline safety management system. If you don't do that, your review process won't get you where you need to be. And that's really where the rubber meets the road here. You get to the end point, or get back into planning. This has to get back into your planning for your next round of implementation. Continuous improvement is that constant state of unease. Management evaluates the risk management effectiveness and fosters improvement in pipeline safety, right? You have to use your audit and assessment results that Paul talked about. You have to have your data analysis and review to identify what are the prevention and corrective actions that you have to put in place. And finally, you want to evaluate new technologies, because we all know that new technologies come along, and if you implement them correctly and you get them into your program, that they will make a difference for you. If you don't review what is new and what you can implement, you're not going to move yourself forward. You're not going to end up with continuous improvement. And finally, the top management review is at least annually. And we have in the document at least annually. You need to review and approve the outputs of the management reviews. And that means that it doesn't mean your CEO has to understand everything that your management review brings out, but they have to look at what the major outputs are. They have to understand them, and they have to be able to stand up in front of the organization and say, that's what we're doing. That's where we're going. That's what we're going to achieve with our safety management system. So I'll bring back up the diagram you've seen a few times today. We're through the full cycle now. One of the things I've added to this document, which is kind of hard to see but on the slide here, but safety culture. It isn't an element, but it is the last chapter of our document, is how safety culture supports an SMS and how an SMS supports safety culture. And then that's what Masood is going to talk to us about. So thank you very much.
Peter, you did a great segue to safety culture. I'm going to pause just a minute and talk about safety culture before I turn it over to Masood for just a moment. You know, you've heard several of us talk about safety culture, and we always tag in a reference to Masood, and there's a reason why we do that. When the group was meeting, and we had lots of discussion about safety culture and where it should figure into the document, didn't we, Stacy? Yes. We hashed and rehashed. We knew that safety culture was interwoven and interlinked and a key factor towards a good safety management system. But we wrestled with how to address it in this document. And Masood was like the champion. Every time we'd start to say, well, you know, we can, no, it's got to be there. We've got it. And he was the one that really drove safety culture. He put the stake in the ground and said, it will be in there. We're going to put it in there. It's important, and it's very critical that we do it. And I would also mention that when it comes to many factors, but especially safety culture, Masood has led in his own state with activities supporting safety culture, which I don't know if you're going to talk about, but he might. He's actually putting his commitment into action in actionable ways. So I think that's a really good thing. So without further rambling on my part, I'd like to introduce Masood Tahaptani, the Director of the Utility and Railroad Safety with the Corporation Commission of Virginia. This or the
Thank you very much, Linda. A lot of expectations here. I hope I can deliver. Linda was very kind to say that I was and Stacy said it, that I was the safety champion. Honestly, I was the one who said we can actually talk about this somewhat intangible concept and figure out what it is as we cannot afford not to do. This past Monday was the 5th year anniversary of the BP accident in the Gulf. I don't know whether you all have realized that, but we tend to forget those types of accidents. That was probably one of the biggest disasters that hit the Gulf, and a lot of people that their livelihood depends on the Gulf. The 11 people that were lost obviously impact their family for years to come. Anything you read about that accident talks about the fact that, at least on that rig, that company's management, slowly but little by little, they pushed aside procedures and safety for one simple reason: production and profit. You can also read, and it says that BP operated under a culture of complacency. Now, as I said, they'll never wash that off of their name, and a lot of innocent, simple people have been impacted for years to come. The document that we're talking about here mentions safety culture a dozen times. If you squeeze all the verbiage about safety culture, it probably takes a couple of 2 or 3 pages. But as my friends on the committee have indicated, there is an absolute critical role that safety culture plays in making a pipeline safety management system as effective as it can be. Let me walk you through that. The successful execution of each of the elements within the pipeline safety management system depends on the actions of every individual that works for a company, every team, every department, at all levels. The actions and inactions of the individuals at all levels of that operator, organization, defines the culture of that organization. These are all simple things we all know about. The foundation of the culture are based on solid policies, great procedures that are not ambiguous and anyone can follow, mindfulness to see what's going on and notice the things that are not right, lessons learned from near misses, and obviously employee and contractor engagement at all times. Any small break in any of that, it's going to undermine the culture. Now, if we don't have a strong safety culture, we won't notice this either. Small breaks will continue to undermine the culture to the point that we have a major disaster. Here's an example. We work very hard. We set out great procedures, great policies. We then hire good people and take care of them. We qualified them properly, and I say properly because in many cases this is simply a check the box, or I can't say that expression you started yet. I wrote it down. But simply it's a check the box. We have now qualified 1,300 people. We paid $1,000 a person. They're qualified. Send them to work. The individual that is properly qualified must understand the intent of that procedure and not just go through the motion. Accept the responsibility for doing the task correctly and then understand that it is absolutely wrong to take a potentially unsafe and maybe small shortcut. Now, these are real things that we found in Virginia. And the reason they're jumping in, and again, it looks a lot better on my screen than it does on your screen, but these are the small things, these are those shortcuts that we see every day. Each one of these by themselves have not and will not cause a major disaster. That was the purpose. When nothing bad happens, when we do these things or when we see them in the field and well, nothing happened, there is a positive reinforcement for the individual, the group, the crew leader, the inspector that says, let's just keep doing it this way. And as we get away from procedures and not do it right, slowly we get worse at what we're doing. And then eventually time, place, and situations line up, an accident happens. People get hurt. Half of a town or city evaporates. 8 or 9 people get killed. Or in case of the Gulf, 11 people, 11 families are impacted, and hundreds of thousands of people, again, are impacted for years to come. The environment is damaged. If you are not too large to fail, your business will fail. You have to shut down. Somebody else will buy you. So is a pipeline safety management system enough to achieve the highest safety? A lot of the speakers before me have said that it will do a good job, but not the best it can. You have to complement it with a true and a strong positive safety culture. There are many definitions of safety culture. The team agreed on what you see on the screen. I won't read it, but it is simply the glue, in our opinion, that keeps all the elements working the best way it can together. Who is responsible for the safety culture of the organization? Obviously, again, you've heard the leaders at any level are responsible to make sure the culture of the organization is solid. But every individual is responsible to advance that cause. No one in your industry should be exempt from not advancing the safety culture. Simply, they cannot afford it. You can't afford to have them. They shouldn't be in the business. As I say, they should be going somewhere else doing something that doesn't require a safety culture. The product you carry, miles and miles under our streets and close to our homes, simply will not allow you to have people within your organization that does not believe this. Maintaining a safety culture requires everyone to notice and address issues that erode the culture. Complacency, normalization of deviance, seeing things that are not right, but they become normal. We look the other way. It's not our problem. Production pressure, profit. Let's put it in. This pipeline has got to get in. And then having the fear to report if you see something incorrect. Overconfidence. It hasn't happened. It won't happen. We're going to do it again and again like this. And then, of course, tolerance of inadequate systems and resources. Not having the right tools and not having enough time to do the right thing. Those all erode the culture no matter where it is. It keeps eating at it until there is none left. The great thing is that our pipeline industry is already on the ball, and they're saying this. AGA says a positive safety culture is one where each individual takes responsibility and accountability for safety in their day-to-day work activities. So that's coming from AGA, and I believe every executive in the gas industry believes that. INGA, safety culture, is some of all safety-related assumptions, beliefs, attitudes, values displayed, not talked about, displayed through the behaviors of leaders, managers, first-line supervisors, and all the employees of that organization. AOPLs, safe pipelines don't come from just safety policy or safety programs. They come from everyone at all levels committed to safety. Every operator sitting in this room or on the web has a safety culture on a continuum, the best and not so much great. Executives and, again, leaders have the responsibility to determine the level at which their company's safety culture is, commit both in words and actions to improve safety culture along that continuum. It's never done. It's never done. When you think that it is done, you have gone backwards. And then chart and navigate a path to get to the best culture you can be. Again, as somebody said, you take over companies, new employees come in, people retire. It's a continuous thing that you have to do. As I said, a lot of us struggle with safety culture being intangible. Somebody said it's a fuzzy thing. You can't wrap your arms around it. It is, but it can be evaluated and assessed. I know PG&E is doing it, Enbridge is doing it, a number of other companies are doing it. They don't have a choice not to do it. They've been faced with serious accidents, and they've been told to do it. We don't need to wait for another accident or for someone to tell us to do it. It can be done by simple surveys, interviews, focus groups, and by observations and audits to determine the effectiveness of this. How can your company take a proactive approach and improve? As Linda said, we are doing this in Virginia. Long before the RP was, I think it was version 8, Ron, that I said, this is going to happen. Under Ron's leadership, this is going to happen. We started this conversation, and we created teams at the executive, middle management, employee, supervisor, inspector, to talk about how do we actually assess and measure safety culture across the state of Virginia. And we came up with survey levels, which, as you can see here, top management includes board of directors, CEOs, president, VP of operation. Management, operation, maintenance, safety, compliance, construction, supervisors, inspectors, auditors, and employees. We have come up with some questions. I won't bore you with reading some of this, but these are questions that they have come up with, these groups have come up with, to actually assess the culture. This is for top management on general. And for example, when it comes to pipeline safety, I believe those that work under my trust, under me, trust my management actions and decisions. This is where you can't talk one thing and do the other thing. There are companies who say safety is first, but then, and I hear this, they say no more fixing leaks during this quarter because you've spent your money, your budget. And I'm sure you're thinking, my God, what kind of company would do that? Under pipeline regulations, policies, and procedures, a number of other questions. I believe everyone in our company shall follow all policies and procedures and pipeline safety regulations, no matter what. No shortcuts. Under training, our company has protocols in place to measure the QA/QC of pipeline safety training. Not just say, you know, they're OQ'd or trained or sat in a room like this right before lunch, and they're being told how to do a certain thing. They have half sleep, they're hungry, they're playing on their phone. We are going through a revamping of the entire OQ program in Virginia. We're rewriting every module, every question. The first module that went out, 60% of these qualified people failed the test. These are the people around that have been doing this work for the past 10 years. These questions were not tough. Even I passed that test. So let me share with you, Linda said that we've done a couple of things. Here are 12 questions that we put out before 2,000 employees of gas companies and their contractors. And again, I'll share with you only 5 questions. We showed them a bunch of those pictures that earlier I showed you, those violations, those problems. And we said, why do you believe that these types of issues that we discussed with you today happen? And we tracked it by operator employee and by contractor. And as you can see, these were anonymous, electronic. We left the room, the operators left the room, and this is what came up. A couple thousand people. 50% of them said these things happen because procedures are not followed. 28% employees are pushed for production. 15% employees' attitude. They don't give a damn about what they're doing. Then we said, do you think that procedures and policies, and especially the PHMSA rules, are important? And they said, 93%, they said always necessary, another 7% sometimes necessary. So these are the same people who said we need policies, procedures, and regulations, but at the same time they said 50% of the problems are happening because we don't follow procedures. Why do you think someone would choose not to report an issue, a safety issue? Not following procedures and policies, rules and regulations is a safety issue. 53% said we don't report it because we think it may impact our buddy in the ditch or in the office. 25%, fear of actions by the regulatory agencies. Now, on that, I have to tell you, it was higher on the contractor side than it was on the utility side. And I've joked about this before, Stacey, that I have to go back and fix this because the operators have to fear me more than the contractors. Something we got to work on. But seriously, there's an issue that I'm fixing now. Operators were pushing all the penalties to the contractors. The contractors would write a check, send it to the operators, they would send it to us. We're fixing that. But the reason I combined it is to show that, again, there is somewhat of a concern about the regulatory agency's actions, and then 7%, it's none of my business. You can't have anybody in your industry who says it's none of my business. You have to find those people and help them find another job. How can we improve the safety culture in pipeline construction? We've seen a lot of issues in pipeline construction. This is why we focused on this. And as you can see here, 46% total, they said focused on quality versus quantity of work. 13% make people that do the work more aware of the negative consequences of not doing the right thing. 16%, better quality training, which, as I said, we're addressing that in Virginia, and so on and so forth. This is in the RP, indicators of a positive safety culture, that everyone embraces safety of personnel, public, and asset, and it is a core value of the organization. The leaders ensure that everyone understands the operator's safety goals, foster systematic consideration of risk, implement change when necessary, allocate adequate resources to make sure that the job is done successfully and in compliance with the PSMS, encourage employees and contractors to engage at all levels and own the process, foster trust at all levels with open, honest communication, promote a questioning and learning environment, reinforce positive behavior and why they're important, do the right thing when nobody's looking, encourage two-way conversations about learning and commitment to applying the learning throughout the entire organization. Finally, non-punitive reporting. We have to make that part of our culture, to make sure that somebody sees something. They don't just say, cut it out and I won't say anything. Yes, cut it out, but I will document it and I will take that sample back to the office so that I can have good data. That happens a lot. So as we talk about assessment, these are the indicators, and we can come up with ways to measure and assess every single one of these things. So a positive safety culture can exist with a formal PSMS, but an effective PSMS cannot exist without a strong positive safety culture. Again, I'll repeat, the culture is the glue. In a mature safety culture, and again, I indicated that we'll never get there, but as we get closer to the maturity, we all know exactly what to do and what not to do. It becomes second nature to do the right thing. It is normal, it's comfortable, no matter what. It doesn't matter if the work is going on at 5 o'clock and it's raining and it's Friday afternoon and it's dark and I have to fix a leak. Doesn't matter, I'll still do it right. Adopting and implementing a pipeline safety management system will strengthen safety culture. The individual elements that you see in the document, when executed in a deliberate, routine, and intentional process, will yield a strong safety culture. Finally, this is our logo in Virginia. Pipeline safety, you have to make it personal. It has to come from the heart. And again, as leaders in this industry, if you come across people that don't believe in this, slowly but surely, you have to eradicate those out of your industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masood. That was excellent as always. I would like to ask for all of our speakers from this morning come up. We are now at the Q&A session. So all those questions you all have been faithfully writing down, now's your opportunity. We have some, oh my. Those are full sheets he's bringing up here. These are from the webcast. We may have to share chairs or stand up.
No, we're not going to share chairs.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, and let's see. So let's first, we have a lot of questions. But first, let's see if we have anybody in the room. Now, this is your opportunity to ask questions to the team. You're looking at a representative section of the people that participate. I don't think we have everybody here. There's a few people, not a few people that are missing. You've got a snippet of 1173. We touched on the sections today, but what are your questions? Implementation, now's the time to ask them, and you can ask the difficult questions. Don't be shy or afraid to ask the ones that are really deep. So anybody here have questions? Would you go to the mics here? We have 2 mics, one on each side. Anybody? You know, if you guys don't ask questions, then I get to. Well, while you're thinking about it,
Please ask questions.
Graham, Francis. Oh, we got a volunteer. All right. Could you please identify who you're with?
Yes, my name is Mike, and I'm with Occidental. I basically have a question. What is PHMSA's role in the implementation of API 1173?
So, excellent question. One I expected. I expected that question to come up. What is our role? As you know, we participated on the development of the standard. We're a strong supporter of safety management systems and safety culture and the aspects of what we can do to improve even better a good trend. As far as implementation, we do not intend to incorporate the standard by reference at this time. We believe that this is a new standard, and for many companies in our industry, the oil and gas industry, we have bits and pieces of it, but we don't have anything really robust. Some companies might, but it's going to be people are going to be all over the place. There are other industries that have very mature programs, and we know it's going to take time. It's going to take time for people to get comfortable with some of these concepts and to fully embrace them. And we believe that if the industry truly believes that it is a good business practice to implement SMS, that it's not something that we're doing just because the regulator makes us do, but if it's the right thing to do, that the industry will embrace it on its own and it won't need to be a regulation. Now, I have to say, if there is a very bad incident, we already have on the record NTSB recommending a standard. So NTSB and other folks know its importance. It's on many hit lists, top 10 lists. If there's a very, very bad incident, that decision could be taken out of our hands. But right now, we believe that we can encourage, we can use a bully pulpit, we can hold workshops like this. We can try to be there with answers and support. But at this point, we don't intend to regulate it. Does that answer your question? All right, I got a double thumbs up. Okay, any other questions here? No? Okay, well, we'll take one from the webcast. And by the way, thank you to everybody on the webcast for tuning in and send in more questions. So this is from an environmental permitting firm. Does the RP provide any direction with regard to excavation and utility locating every time for every instance of digging regardless of risk? So who wants to take that one?
I'll take that.
Okay.
I like to have an opportunity to talk about calling before you dig and the quality of excavation procedures. I am chair of the Common Ground Alliance Board of Directors, and Tim Felton of Colonial and Greg Smith of Shell are both here today, and they also participate as board members. Tim as a past chair and stakeholder group representative, and Greg as a current oil stakeholder rep for that group. There's 16 stakeholder groups, by the way, and then I moved out of that role to be the overall chairman. You can't assess risk, and we talked a lot about risk assessment, risk mitigation, recognizing quality of procedures without looking at damage prevention. And so I think that's an area to have continuous improvement. I mean, most companies have either at least had near misses or incidents where, really bad incidents, potentially with fatalities. And I can tell you those are culture-changing incidents. But again, to learn from others and get ahead of, we've said this a lot in the committee, and Linda said it once, the cheapest knowledge you get is that you learn from others. And looking at outside and inside incidents and strengthening those procedures consistently are one of the biggest risk reductions you can do. And so I think it is a requirement of the practice. I know everyone in this room is absolutely committed to it. And then, we talked about, or Peter touched on, at Kinder Morgan, we report every near-miss encroachment to the chairman of the board, Rich Kinder, every Monday afternoon. That's the seriousness that we treat those with. I know a lot of other people in here treat them that way too. So as we go through our management meeting, that's one of the first topics we work through. So I think the standard expects it, and I just encourage us as a group to just keep pressing better and better damage prevention, be part of the Common Ground Alliance if you're not, and then sharing and learning from others is really important.
Thank you. Just for courtesy, I will mention that there was another question about, is PHMSA considering adopting 1173, which we already answered that. Next question is, and Brianne, you may want to take a shot at this one, or anybody here. Is it the intent of the PSMS to have site-specific operating procedures?
I'll take a first shot and then anybody can add on. I think one of the things that we were very cognizant of is we were writing a document that was intended to apply to quite a range of operators. I know we mentioned this earlier, but even a small distribution company that may have 3 employees to a large transmission company. So in that vein, I think it depends on the company, and I think that's really left up to the operator. If that makes the most sense from a risk standpoint to have site-specific operating procedures, then yes. But again, it depends on the scope and the scale and the risks that the operator is facing. I don't think we chose to be prescriptive in that regard.
Good. Anybody else? Nope, everybody's good with that. Okay, great. After a while, on that committee, we went through so many issues, so I think we have this telepathy, I doubt you're going to hear many different strains. Okay, here's an interesting one. There are similarities between PSMS and pipeline integrity management. How do they differ? Is SMS seen as an overarching or complementary or subordinate to pipeline integrity management?
That question comes up quite a bit, and it's actually one of the first issues we dealt with as a team. And we were very clear, all of us, that it is absolutely much more than just integrity management. Integrity management is just a piece. If you think that all this is integrity management 201 and the rule was 101, you really missed the scope and the idea of the SMS. There are so many other issues that come into risk management decisions other than just what type of tools we put in pipelines. You're going to miss the boat, and you won't be in compliance with the SMS because it is much broader. It's organizationally, it's how we make decisions day to day, from our operations all the way through integrity management. Integrity management's a piece of it, of course, but it's only one piece of it. I invite anybody else to.
Stacy?
I probably think integrity management is bigger than some people in this room, but I think specifically the mandate on leadership and the huge weight on safety assurance are 2 places where, when we did the gap analysis, those were 2 areas where we felt we were clearly filling gaps that were very important to fill to improve safety performance.
Agreed. Any questions from the room here? Okay, I'll just keep rolling until somebody goes to a mic. Okay, so I'm suspecting this may go to Peter Lidiak. Yes. Why is RP 1173 a recommended practice and not a standard?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think that when you look at the document, you'll see that there are a lot of shalls in there, and some people have asked that question. Shouldn't this be a standard versus a recommended practice? It goes a little bit, I think, to what Linda reflected on earlier when she was answering the question about what does PHMSA plan to do with the document. We want to get this document out and get people using it. We called it a recommended practice because, frankly, a standard is also a voluntary document. A recommended practice is a voluntary document in the industry. But we want people to understand that at this point in time, we want people to take it and make it their own and not make it seem quite so intimidating, if you will. So that's part of the reason for it. And I think that's really what it's all about. The document has those shalls in it, if you're going to conform to it, you're still going to have to meet all those shalls, and that's really the bottom line.
You know, we actually talked about that quite a bit early in our committee meetings. And, you know, in our research, there's not a lot of difference between a standard and a recommended practice. In fact, several recommended practices are referenced in code. I think the shalls are very clear, and if you claim conformance, you have to do all of those things, or you're not really conforming or compliant with the expectation. To Linda's point, we talked a lot about referencing this in code, and I believe the consensus of operators and stakeholders and even the regulators is this is really big. And if it's immediately referenced in code before programs can be developed and thought through, all you've done is make people suddenly be very defensive about how they approach this. And the idea is, and I had this in one of my slides, is that operators should pursue this urgently and enjoy the benefits of it and make as much progress as they possibly can. Plus, you're never quite there. So it becomes a little bit of a difficult thing for a regulator to do a go, no-go, because some people will be further down the path than others. In fact, let's say in the odd case or unlikely case that you really did get to perfect maturity and conformance, as soon as you acquire someone or you know, another company, suddenly you have pieces that aren't conforming. And in fact, all of your organization is on a continuum. Some will be further along the path than others. Now you're working on the lagging pieces, and so it really works better as a recommended practice with lots of shalls. If you claim conformance, you do all of them. And I appreciate Jeff and Linda and Masood that industry needs some time to embrace, implement, figure out how they benefit from it before that part starts. And so I think that's years out, except for the point that Linda made. Sometimes they don't have a choice. So I just wanted to expand on that a minute. It was talked about a lot within the committee.
I think I was one of the ones that was questioning why an RP and not standard early on. You all remember this. But then we moved away as a team from the philosophy of compliance to choice. Let's not forget that this RP came as a result of a couple of major accidents, NTSB telling API, you need this, the nuclear, airline, chemical, they have it, you should have it. So if we're talking about regulation and standards and shall, and we're hanging our hat on that, how much can I do to comply, but what is the right thing to do? We still haven't moved this ball forward. For that reason, I gave in and I said, let's start with an RP, and I think FIMS is there too. But Linda said it very well. I hope we don't have another major accident, but if we do, then you're going to see this stuff pushed into regulations.
I think to build on what Ron shared too, this is not a point solution. It's not hurry up quick, document that we're in full compliance and we're done. It's a never-ending journey, and we should constantly be challenging ourselves as how we can do better in each of the elements of this recommended practice. And I think that's another component of it. It's just not all about going out and documenting compliance, but how do you truly get better, reduce risk, and be a safer company? And that's something that happens over time.
I have one more add, Linda, and something I want to make a point on. One of the things we did decide to do, and it's something I should have mentioned when I was up before, and API is an ANSI accredited standards development organization, so our processes follow ANSI procedures. But we also chose to make this document an American national standard, so it is going to be published as an ANSI standard as well as an API RP. So it puts a little extra reinforcement behind the document to make it an ANSI standard. So I mentioned that as well.
We have a question from the floor. Oh, we've got two. Sweet. Could you please identify yourself?
Leif Jensen from Sunoco Pipeline.
The camera.
A two-part question. I'd like to ask them both and then be seated. First one is for the trade organizations. There's an old process improvement adage that you can't manage what you don't measure. So from an industry perspective, in light of the RP not being incorporated by reference, how will we measure the implementation across oil and gas? And then the second part is, in light of it not being incorporated by reference, a question for PHMSA, will you still create inspection protocols and ask operators how they're going?
Ooh, that's a juicy question. Can I answer the second one first?
I'll take the first.
So that's a very valid question. It's not a regulation. It is a recommended practice. I would expect that internally we have to train our own people on some of these concepts. I mean, we have a wide variety of knowledge, just like the industry does, as far as safety management systems. And internally, we have to do some socialization and training. Here's what is meant by this, and this is what we would expect to see. So when you talk about creating inspection protocols, I don't know if we're going to create an inspection form or something like that, but what we might do, and I'm just kind of speculating, if there is a bad accident, we may go out and say, have you guys considered this? What are you doing? Where's the process? How are you handling your processes? We may ask questions about safety culture. Matter of fact, we already have been doing that. In the last couple of major incidents where we've had to issue corrective action orders, we have incorporated, in one case specifically, a requirement to develop a safety management system. So sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. It just depends on what's going on. We do not plan to go out and do inspections. That would actually be beyond our authority. It is not a regulation, therefore we can't go out and inspect for compliance with something that's not a regulation. But we might, following an incident, ask how operators are addressing these types of issues. Does that answer your question? Okay, so that's the second question. I'll defer to the...
I think John or Peter might want to speak too, but you asked the question, Leif, about I believe how we would measure whether we're, as an industry, are we moving forward on PSMS, right? And, I'd invite you to talk to Sean Lyons here, but, as part of the Association of Oil Pipelines, we believe in this so much that this is a game changer for our industry, that we have a strategic initiative around the implementation of this document, which you are aware of. And Sean and his team are going to be working on, well, how do we measure? And it's going to come down to some training that we need to put on to make sure that our industry operators understand, like we do, the importance and how to implement, and then encourage that they do implement, and then survey, are you doing it? Because, if it comes down to operators choosing not to, I think we'll target them, hopefully, and go into them and say, hey, the rest of us are going down this road. You need to be on the track with us, because if any of us have an incident, we all know that we're all get challenged by virtue of someone else's incident. So it behooves all of us to kind of get on the train and let's move down this road together.
Thanks, Scott. I'd just add from the AOPL and API perspective, Scott mentioned this is a strategic initiative at the executive level across the liquids industry for 2015. And we have a team that is active that's taking the baton for implementation, and our charge is to assist, to encourage, to educate our members, provide them tools for implementation, and we see measurement and evaluation as vital parts of that mission, encouraging, enabling that evaluation. We know we want to do that. We know we need to do that. Our expectation, especially in the early years, is that may be more qualitative than quantitative. We certainly want to collect examples of that. We want to be able to show ourselves, show each other, these are the types of performance improvements. So it's not just measuring and evaluating your SMS implementation, but really, how did you improve? How did things get better because of that? And trying to draw those linkages. So those are certainly questions and tools we'll be asking, and it'll be up to the operators to be able to help answer. Thank you.
Most of you know that the states get their pipeline safety authority from PHMSA. We work with them. So I believe that states and PHMSA have a critical role to play here to encourage operators to slowly implement this particular RP or standard. And as I said, in Virginia, we're not waiting. I have asked all of my operators to do a gap analysis on this. I've asked. If they don't do it, we're going to have a conversation. And then behind that, there's a safety culture. So again, to my state colleagues across, they have a role to play. If they believe in this, they need to encourage, again, by choice, and not so much by audits and inspections and those kinds of things.
Linda, I'm sorry. Kate, you want to go first? And also, Leif, I think the other thing to remember is that in the document, there is a requirement for this, for anybody's SMS to include goals, objectives, and key performance indicators, and to do audits and to do evaluations. So it's not like we've left that open, for no action. I think each operator is really going to have to meet that audit criteria as well. As John mentioned, we're looking at what are the some overarching industry metrics we might collect. And I can tell you most of these programs start where we are now. They grow over time to fit the need as more experience is acquired. And I can tell you, for instance, responsible care, the oversight of INPO over the nuclear power industry has changed over time. And we expect that will change as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up there where Peter left off, and that was going to be my first response. Each operator is going to have to measure themselves. However, AGA has started something similar to what AOPL is talking about. We have several of our member companies that have come forward and said they are willing to implement this system. They're already starting in on it, whether they're working on their gap analysis or reviewing what they already currently have. And then as they go through the process, they're going to share their experience with other AGA members. So we have that feedback and that loop going too.
And then I'll add on behalf of Inga, on the gas transmission side. Similarly, again, each operator will have to do their own gap analysis. From an Inga perspective, we see this as a natural evolution from our Integrity Management Continuous Improvement Initiative, which was launched several years ago. Management systems was one of the key elements of that, and I think you'll hear more this afternoon from Mike McGonigal about that. So we see this as kind of the natural next step in some of the management system work we started a few years ago. At this point, we plan to have a couple workshops for our operators on how to implement and some of the more practical, how to translate some of this into actual on the ground later this year, and then also still trying to figure out how we're going to measure over time with our operators' progress on this, and figuring out how to report that up to our board.
Great. Thank you, Brianne. We have another question from the floor.
Yes, thanks. My name is Anthony Lamont. I'm with TransCanada. Actually, more of a specific question on the stakeholder engagement element. and its relationship to the risk management activities that we've talked a lot about today. I'd be interested to know a little bit more about some of the language that was included in the elements. It says essentially getting involvement from internal and external, and I'm emphasizing external, input on the identification and management of risk. There's some interesting concepts I think folks in the risk management world are probably pretty interested to hear more about. So if you guys have any thoughts you could share or some background on some of the pros and cons you may have tossed around as you developed that element, I'd appreciate it.
Great question. Stacy, you want to jump at that one?
I'll start, and I hope the rest of you jump in. I think that, building on the concept of 811 and shared responsibility, I think that's the easiest place to begin to see how this might work. We talk about damage prevention as such an important part of bringing down risk, and that's one example where input from the communities and the stakeholders who you hope to help you identify risks and prevent risks by a whole range of safe practices feeds into risk management. So in the spirit of IMP and DIMP and TRIMP, it's all about knowing the environment around your pipeline. Jeff, I hope you're listening. And so with change, demographic change, weather pattern change, economic area changes, activities around the pipeline are going to change. And, some of you operate thousands and thousands of miles, and, there's eyes and ears out there that are going to be aware of activities that can impact the pipeline. That's just, an example of how information that might be known by others needs to have a pathway into you where it's organized, determined, they know how to match up with who needs and can act on that information. Does that start to answer the question?
Yeah, I actually have an add to that, a real-life example that occurred this year. There was a pipeline that, I don't want to name the operator, but let's just say this. They had a failure at a river crossing. And, our people were investigating, they were responding. There was a lot of effort going into trying to figure out how could this pipeline have failed at this river crossing. And we got a media call. It went through headquarters and went through our governmental affairs, public affairs folks. And one of the questions that came from the media was, was this at the site of that massive ice buildup last year? And I thought was, massive ice buildup? What? We didn't know about it. And the question is, did the company know about it? The media and the local folks knew about it. Did the company have that information? Was that threat or risk information that they could have known about? Who knows? But it was something that ended up affecting their pipeline. So it's information may come from unusual sources. Reaching out to external stakeholders, can you talk to everybody? No, you can't. But there may be some ways to pull in information that could be useful to protecting your pipeline. Any other comments? No? Okay, I'm watching the time because I know everybody's hungry. So we have a few more minutes. Next question I thought was interesting. And we have several more here. So I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. Damage prevention is championed by CGA. What industry group will champion PSMS? Will this group have a workshop for the pipeline industry? So I'm going to toss that one to the non-regulators.
I think it's important to note that all of the major pipeline trade associations participated in producing this document. I think we all have plans to implement workshops. And we also plan to, I think, open up our forums to each other's members so that we can get some cross-training and cross-information. So hopefully that answers the question.
I would just add that we plan a range of tools and mechanisms to help educate, encourage, assist our members with the AOPL and API, the liquids industry. We, of course, are mindful of our industry-wide role. Of course, these will be global kind of tools. But whether it's a workshop or a one-pager or a video or a 5-pager kind of gap analysis or a how-to, we have gotten underway on a very aggressive effort to implement amongst our members now that the standard is coming to fruition. And all I can say is stay tuned. In the coming months, you'll hear a lot more about that.
Okay.
Actually, too, Linda. So sorry to jump in yet again, but you know, in addition to that, I'll say that we've already engaged in discussions with CEPA in Canada, which is the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, to talk about how this document may be relevant for Canadian operators as well. So we are expanding beyond the core group here, but we recognize there are opportunities.
Yeah, like Peter and John have said, each of us representing the various industries has planned workshops. I already mentioned, and Brianne mentioned something similar for the transmission companies, the companies piloting this and then reporting back. And John had mentioned some documents. At AGA, we're still not sure what that's going to take yet. You've heard us all talking about how this is a journey. So at AGA, we're talking about some kind of a roadmap document, but what format that's going to take, that's still to be determined as we go forward. And I would also say that right now, currently, at AGA, we have what we call a discussion group that is focused specifically on this pipeline safety management system. And once the RP is published, we'll be discussing that extensively also.
Okay. Oh, someone from the floor.
Yeah, Todd Cash with Air Force. I keep hearing that we're going to communicate this through AGA and API to the operators. Has anybody considered how this can be communicated to the contractors?
Well, I think that will be largely left to the operators. It is a requirement. You know, we talked a lot about, in fact, you heard a lot today about contractors being included. We did finally get to a point that we were talking about treating contractors exactly as employees. And that's not quite the right answer either, because contractors have their own procedures. And so I think each operator will have to wrestle with what parts get communicated to contractors and how. Here's an example. You might not take your SMS document and explicitly train contractors on that. But we talked about the document being an overarching process with lots of policies and procedures under that. And so you have to communicate those procedures and expectations to contractors so their actions, because your SMS drives all these other things, those things have to be communicated so the actions conform to the expectations of the SMS. So it's just a distinction I want to make. Every operator might not go out to each contractor and try to train them on SMS, but the policies that underlie that have to be communicated, and I think it effectively does the same thing.
I take a step back for a moment. Is that I think we talked about this morning. Is this document is all-encompassing of very small municipal gas companies up to the largest majors, right, and everyone in between. And so I think, you know, how individual operators need to partner with and communicate this to their contractors is going to be different based upon the size and scale of that operation and the expectations that they would have vis-a-vis those contractors. But I think an important element of this SMS is that contractors are an important part of the safe operation of the organization, and that the expectation is that the operator will effectively communicate to those operators so that they can operate in conformance with the expectations that the company sets around the SMS principles. Hope that made some sense.
I don't think the trade associations are going to ignore the contractor communities. Inga Foundation, I'm sure, will be involved in planning the work that the gas transmission industry will be putting on. At API, we have a general membership segment that will certainly have access to any of the meetings that we set up, and they'll be well publicized within our publications. And I think also, as an example, our annual pipeline conference is going on next week, and we have a dedicated session, and we get a good number of our industry contractors in addition to the operating company personnel that attend that event. We're expecting, I guess, around 550 people this year, so I think we'll get some fairly broad coverage out of some of the activities we have planned as well.
I have several questions. We're not 11:45. Do you guys want to stick around another 5 or 10 minutes to get to talk to some of these? Okay, I got enough nods, yes. These are good questions. I think they're good questions. Please comment, and I have a feeling this question I'm about to read may also come up for the executive roundtable this afternoon, so you execs, prick your ears up, because this one may come to you guys later. Please comment on reconciling continuous improvement, which often requires time and money, resources, with demands of investors for ever-increasing return on investment. I see everybody running up here to the podium.
Well, I think it's good business to do this. Now, every risk mitigation activity has a component of considering cost. And don't go away with thinking that cost is the overarching concern, but there are some point you've spent to where there's diminishing returns. And so within our company, cost is not a consideration for compliance. We expect 100% compliance with the rules and regulations. And it's also not a consideration with risk reduction. Now, it's got to be substantial risk reduction. There's some point that I guess you could just decide we're just not going to operate. That's the ultimate decision to have no risk. And you never quite get to that point. But I think prudent operators can wrestle with cost and benefit and probability and how big is the consequence. And it's different for every kind of instance you face. And I think they can, in a very effective and intelligent way, decide, how cost, benefit, and in fact, as I interact with executives on the oil side and a lot on the natural gas side as well, there's a high expectation and anticipation for this standard, and I believe almost all companies will embrace it and try to look for the benefits from it. So I think they're at the level of risk reduction we're talking about. There's really no tension to cost. It's good business to make those choices. So.
Thank you, Ron. Here's a more technical question that I truly do not have any clue on how to answer this one. API RP 1173 mirrors 1987's QMS of the ISO 9001. Do we need both? Notice how everybody looks at Mark? That's so funny. Okay, Mark, you're the designated.
NTSB thought so.
Right, that's good enough.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. That's a good point.
One of the things that we did early on in this work is we had members share different views of the elements that we could use. And ISO 9000 elements, which look very similar to what you saw here this morning in Ron's presentations, were among them. We looked at PAS 55, we looked at ISO 9000, ISO 14000, we looked at a number of other standards. Actually, the NTSB referred us to API 750, which then became
the guts of really what became OSHA process safety management in 29 CFR 1910.119. So all these have interplay and interchange. We had a lot of healthy discussion about which elements, what we should call them. For example, you'll see operational controls. And our group, a lot of our members of our group struggled with, why do we call it operational controls? Well, that's exactly the term that the NEB uses in their onshore pipeline safety regulations. It's exactly the term, I believe, that's used in PAS 55. So we saw the common ground and we said, and I think Ron touched upon this before, we wanted people to start with what they had and build on it. You know, some people have come from process safety management. They may run refineries, they may run gas plants. There are gas operators in here who run gas plants, and they brought process safety management elements over into their safety management system. Other people started in a different place, and the key is it's not about where you start from, but where you're moving towards, which are these 10 elements. If you can draw value out of ISO 9000, you know, go for it. There's great things there. But we try to capture a lot of those, you know, key points in this document and to build on all those great management systems that we saw out there.
And then I made a comment as Mark was coming to the podium, but the NTSB specifically recommended that API develop a safety management system for pipelines. That's the PSMS, the P is pipelines. And so there's a lot of similarity, but I think it was time. We agree with the NTSB. I think we met everything they asked for. They did participate on our committee. And so anyway, it's pipeline-specific SMS. So there is duplication out there, though.
In the interest of time, I'm just going to do one more of these questions because I know I could go on. Please detail how safety cultures apply to more than personnel safety or personal safety to include assets. Do you want me to reread that? Oh. Please detail how safety culture applies to more than personal safety to include assets.
I would ask the question how it doesn't. If safety culture is important to protect personnel safety, put the cones out there, do the shoring, all of that stuff, and if you don't do it right, you're going to kill somebody. Why is it not important to make the joint right, the weld right, put the pipe in the right place, all of that to protect the public?
Stacy and then Paul. Stacy and then Paul.
Having looked at a number of companies and raised this question, it always surprised me that there were such differences in procedures and metrics between personnel safety and how employees protect the asset the same way they protect the guy next to them or themselves. And, you know, we've always said nobody knows more about the asset than the person who's working on it. The challenge is to have the attitude built in the company that the employee who works on that asset, owns that asset, that it's their responsibility to be free and encouraged and recognized for coming forward to say there's something here that could be done better, whether it's a process, a piece of equipment, or something else, and that, you know, there's so much attention paid to counting those OSHA reportables. I think what we're trying to say here, just as much attention should be paid to how employees look at protecting the asset and encourage that and track that. And it's a measure that you can use in looking at how your culture's doing. If you're getting a lot of it and you didn't used to have it, you're doing better. No doubt.
Perhaps I can share just a couple examples of how Enbridge has deployed safety culture assessment to protect our operations and ensure the pipelines operate safely. I keyed on two of them during my presentation. One was at a large terminal that was an operating terminal where we were also doing a lot of new construction. So the focus there was really to prevent damage to operating facilities. And we did a complete and fulsome safety culture assessment of the operations taking place out there. And it really had a meaningful impact on both our operational group and the projects group doing work at the site. We've also deployed fulsome safety culture assessments in our control room, and multiple of them over time. And it's absolutely imperative that those operating the system have a strong value for safety and make the right decisions.
Great. Thank you very much to all of the folks in the audience.
Can I correct one error?
Oh.
Not yours. I just want to say on the question on damage prevention, I mentioned Tim Felt and Greg Smith, but Jeff Weiss is also a board member on the Common Ground Alliance, and PHMSA is very active. In fact, they support about a quarter of the budget for 811, and the rest comes from member companies. But I know PHMSA and Jeff is a member at large for the board, and
Should have thought of that.
I didn't want to leave that one out.
Thank
so.
you for fixing that. I might have heard about it. Hi, Jeff. Hey, it's time for lunch. When you come back at 1:30, notice you got about over an hour and a half for lunch. We'll be hearing from Robin Rorick, if I pronounce his name right. He's the Group Director for Midstream and Industry Operations with API. He's our keynote speaker. And then we're going to have an executive roundtable after that, which I think will be very intriguing. So this afternoon, we get to hear from executives about how they have tried SMS and the challenges and what they're doing to promote it within their own companies. So thank you very much. I would ask the speakers this afternoon to come up for just a second before you leave. And with that, have a great lunch. Thank you.